this is crazy. This is so crazy. Okay, this is going exactly how I wanted this to go.
Have you ever watched someone end their entire therapy career all while live streaming it on TikTok? Well, you're about to. Now listen, I'm not one for controversy really. I don't do a lot of that on my page, but after this, maybe I'm going to, because there is some wild tea going across on therapy TikTok that I need to make you aware of, because it's bringing up a very interesting question. Somebody is doing something that may get them into a whole lot of trouble. Okay, let me just show you my screen here real quick. There's somebody by the name of Therapy Jessa. And what Therapy Jessa is doing, and this is her page, right? I'm not trying to tell you to go do anything to her. Like, just watch. Don't interact. Don't do anything mean. That's not what this is about. But it brings up an interesting question. What Therapy Jessa is doing is she is going on live, and people are criticizing her because they feel that she is providing therapy while on TikTok live. Oftentimes throughout her live sessions, she will bring people up on stage or into the live with her and ask them questions about their anxiety, ask them questions about their depression or their mental health symptoms, and get them to describe really what their life story is or what's going on. And then throughout the live stream, she'll talk about different therapeutic techniques and some different things that you can do and kind of sharing stuff. Now, a lot of people are wondering, where's the line? Like, is she practicing therapy online without consent and without like actually being in a licensed therapeutic relationship with this person? Or is she just giving information? Therapy Jessa is very much of the opinion that she is just giving information.
We're understanding how anxiety shows up in different people's bodies. We're just asking the very basic questions. Somebody down in the chat said, how can you do this to people who aren't your clients and who are under 18? To be on live, you have to be over 18. And because this isn't psychotherapy, I'm just asking people how anxiety shows up. So it's just a question. You can ask people questions.
And that's what her whole page is about. And she thinks that that's just all she's doing. She's just spreading good psychology information on her page. And this controversy is really causing her to blow up. She's gained quite a few followers, some in a great way and some in not so great a way. Now, here's the things that you should know to be an educated consumer. Here's what the criticism is. As a therapist, they are providing a medical service, right? So this is something that is regulated under the Department of Health. And there's a couple of things that you have to do before you can provide someone with a medical service. As a counselor, our words are the therapeutic tool. So the equivalent would be like if you went to go get a surgery done, but you never signed the paperwork saying, yes, I understand that this is a surgery. I would like this surgery done. This is the type of surgery that I'm consenting to get done. You're okaying and giving permission to the doctor to do that surgery. Well, the surgery happens in our brains, and it happens with the therapist's words. We're going in, figuring out what's going on, and then providing some advice, some therapeutic intervention with our words to help change that person, change their psychology, which, you'd argue maybe is even more significant than a surgery, right? But there's a lot of rules to that. You have to consent, you have to sign a consent form, and the current situation in mental health counseling is that you're only allowed to practice inside of your state. If you're practicing in different states, you have to be licensed in that particular state. Otherwise, you're not allowed to practice there. Psychology and counseling does not have a national certification. It's all state specific. And that's because the education requirements for each state are different. Well, if you're on live, you're not doing that. The other question is she giving this advice to minors? Right? Are there people who are minors on these lives that she is kind of participating with? Because that's even a whole nother level of problem. Not only do you have to consent even as an adult, but you have to consent. And if it's a minor, you have to get the parents' consent. Otherwise, you're providing a medical service and you're doing something that can change that person without the parents knowing that that's taking place. Now, Jessa has addressed this, and she says that, well, in order to have a TikTok account and to go live jointly on TikTok, which is what she's doing, you have to be over 18. There's some checks and balances for that. But everyone knows that there's a lot of people who go live on TikTok that are not 18. There's a lot of ways around that. So it's not a very good verification. And if she were to get called into court for this, court's not going to care that TikTok didn't do a good job verifying. It's the therapist or the medical professional's job to verify that this is not a minor. That burden of responsibility falls on her. So let's take a look at some of this and see what other people are saying.
Imagine the size of the potential vulnerability hangover that you might experience if you were randomly invited on stage in front of 1,000 people and asked to share about your life.
And she does. She routinely has like 1,500 followers in those lives, like sometimes even more. So he's not exaggerating there, actually. I've jumped in the lives a couple times. That's pretty accurate.
And not just that, but you were asked to do that by someone who is trained to get you to do that, who's trained to get you to be comfortable, essentially oversharing.
This is the big criticism.
The potential for a massive vulnerability hangover after that was filled with pain and shame, is just astronomical. And it doesn't matter what the intent of that person on stage who is trained to do that, who wants to give you a good thing. It does not matter that they might have good intentions.
Absolutely.
There is so much potential for damage and harm there. And that is just one of many reasons why it is so unethical.
I love that he never explicitly states like who he's talking about. And so, he's doing a pretty good job dodging it here. So no one can come back. But this is one of the things I think therapists can be a little bit too nervous or like too protective about these things. Like if someone's doing something wrong, I think we should call them out. Like, you have to say like, hey, like this is a huge concern. Pay attention to this. This is a problematic situation. So I don't know. I appreciate what he's doing, but also like I'm going to name the person here.
For a trained therapist to offer anything even remotely like therapy in a live on social media, there's just so much potential for harm.
Absolutely. Now here's the interesting thing, right? Here's where the courts and the ethics board are going to look at it. It has nothing to do, and he makes a good point. This is what Dr. Jacob is saying. It has nothing to do with intention. You can have the best intentions in the world. Because think about it. Many times, those people who push their religious affiliations onto their clients have the best intentions. Well, you have schizophrenia, you have dissociative identity disorder, you just need to pray more because these are demons. Of course, that therapist thinks that they're doing the right thing and they have positive intentions about it, but that's wildly unethical. You lose your license for that shit. So even if the intentions of Jessa are good, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you have to follow certain guidelines because a group of individuals, a group of professionals, and a group of consumers have gotten together to determine what is the best way to conduct yourself as a counselor in order to protect the consumer. And that's what the ethics board is there for. And the ethics board has determined there's certain things that you have to check, and Jessa's not checking those here.
Got one or two more.
This is from Deconstructing Therapists, by the way. Go check them out. They're a very small channel, comparatively, but they make some great points about Jessa.
Any advice on having to interact with a diagnosed narcissist? Don't. See ya.
Here's the problem with that. It's not always safe to just cut them off or go no contact. Especially if you're a minor and having to live at home with one, you don't have a choice. This also further stigmatizes people with narcissistic personality disorder. Because, yeah, it is possible for them to
also
get
true.
help. It might not happen often, but it's possible. In fact,
I've worked
there have
with
been
many people with that diagnosis.
some creators here
That's
on
a wonderful
TikTok.
work.
There's somebody out on YouTube. I can't remember their names right now, but if I find their account, I'll link them or put them in the comments. But they have narcissistic personality disorder. They're aware of it, and they're doing the work so that it doesn't impact their relationships.
He's awesome, by the way.
As much. But that is a very dangerous piece of advice because not everybody can just not interact with somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder.
Absolutely true. And actually, Lee Hammock falls into a loophole. Lee Hammock is not a licensed professional. He does not claim to be at all. So Lee Hammock can tell people to do whatever they want. Like he could say, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. And there's no real legal recourse for Lee Hammock because he is very clear and he does a great job at this, actually. Go check him out. He falls into this loophole because he's not a licensed professional. It doesn't claim to be, and is very clear that he's giving life coaching, not like medical mental health help. And so the weight of his words is much less. The law and the ethics board are going to look at his words not with the same weight that somebody who is and claims that license of licensed mental health counselor or licensed professional counselor. It's very different. Let's take a look at another one.
First time you've sat in front of a therapist and you've like even heard a therapist talk about this jargon, and I'm like saying things like your communication center and your inner child, and you're like, what is this? No judgment. Welcome. The more you hear about it, the more you're going to learn. And the more you're going to start moving towards this orientation.
What is
the
this
more you're
music
gonna
though?
be
It's
like,
like crazy
whoa,
dramatic.
my anxiety might be some like little kid part of myself. That's interesting.
For those of you who are adamant that she's not performing therapy, that clip is for you. You'll notice in the beginning that she starts with, if this is the first time you're sitting in front of a therapist, implying that she as a professional is in her therapist role.
It's a big problem. It's a big criticism, right? There's one more clip I want to show you here. She's being criticized for a little bit of the other side. And, you know, I've seen a bunch of therapists do this, I feel like. So I don't know. I don't know if we can claim as much blame and shame on this one, but it is also kind of an issue.
I am dead inside.
I understand that being a mental health professional on social media is kind of a whole new world of ethics that we are all having to navigate. But making silly little joke videos that are making light of mania, especially when mania is often a pretty traumatic and terrifying and dangerous experience, feels like a pretty clear no to me.
And I have had some clients that I've worked with personally, several actually, who have come back from a manic episode or a manic experience with such guilt and shame. They feel horrible about it. And so to see a therapist kind of like make light of that and to kind of not treat that delicately and not with the sensitivity that you would expect a therapist to do is very difficult. Is really problematic. Like, I don't know if you remember, there were a couple of those nurses who worked inside of like the delivery labor part of the hospital, and they were talking about their like pet peeves or their icks with their clients, like when you're in labor and delivery and you want a drink of water, but we can only give you ice chips. Ugh. Or when you're being needy while you're pushing. Ugh. And those nurses got fired for making those videos about icks that they have with their patients in the labor and delivery room. This feels very similar to me, like ick. Oh, game. Oh my God. You got manic episode and that's really bad. Here's my thoughts on the whole thing. When it comes down to it, is she giving therapy? The answer for me, yes, she's giving therapy, because there's a huge difference. And I think a lot of the therapists on TikTok have balanced this line really well. They don't give specific advice to the followers inside of the chat. They will talk about a general topic and they will make sure not to give prescriptive advice to those followers and instead talk about a general topic. So,
do you have any tips for depression in general? Oh gosh, this is such a heavy question because depression is so heavy, isn't it? But in general, as a general understanding of depression.
So like that one clip that we just watched about narcissists, any idea on dealing with a narcissist? The appropriate response would have been, well, based on the current research, there's a lot of ways that you can interact with narcissists, a lot of what, you know, and then you kind of launch into the research, you kind of launch into some good books and some things. And hey, if you want to work through your narcissistic relationship, go seek a professional counselor in your area. But here's some of the topics that you can go and research on your own, or here's some of the things that we know based on research and clinical experience. Not telling that person just to go no contact. That's therapeutic advice. There was actually a very interesting case where two individuals, and this is a real story, this person lost their license in the state of Florida. Two people were at a church. The one gentleman knew that the other gentleman was a therapist. And so at church in the lobby, the one guy went and talked to the therapist. Hey, I'm having some discipline problems with my kid. They're just, you know, sipping coffee in the lobby of this church. Hey, I'm having discipline problems with my kid. Like, what should I do? And the therapist just laughed and joked. It's like, well, spare the rod, spoil the child, you know? And so then that person went home taking their advice very literally, saying, wow, I talked to this therapist in the lobby at church and they said, spare the rod, spoil the child. And so they went home and they beat their child. Well, then DCF was called and the whole abuse case kind of opened up, and the dad said, well, I thought I was doing the right thing because this therapist at church told me to do this. That therapist was then held responsible. Everything that comes out of the mouth of a therapist, when they are known to be a therapist to that other person, they are held responsible for because, and this gets to my second point, there's a power differential, and everything when it comes down to the ethics board and the ethics of being a counselor comes down to power differentials. What I mean by that is the voice and the advice of a therapist is much more powerful and listened to with a lot more intensity than just your average Joe. If you walk down the street and someone said, well, you should beat your kids more, that would make them, you know, listen to you better. As opposed to if a therapist said, well, you should really consider corporal punishment as an alternative for a child who's not being well disciplined. there's a difference in the level, and especially in the court, with how much they're going to look at the power of those words. The therapist has more power in that situation. Similar to, like, if some Joe Blow down the street said, we should nuke North Korea. It has a certain level of weight, right? No one's really going to listen to him, hopefully. But if the president says, I'm really considering we should probably just nuke North Korea, there's a huge difference in that. The president can't joke about that because those words are taken much more seriously. Same thing here, right? It's the same reason we saw Trump being investigated for inciting violence against the Capitol, right? Anyone could say, well, we should storm the Capitol, and it's not that big a deal. But if the president says it, the words of the president are much more powerful. The words of a therapist are much more powerful. And the reason that is because people, and this is supposed to be that way, if you have the credentials of licensed mental health counselor, people are going to listen and implement your advice because they expect, and they reasonably expect, that you have been professionally trained and that the words that you are telling them are something that you can follow and listen to. Now, the problem is, when you're talking with someone on TikTok Live, you do not have the background information. You do not have the full story, and you do not have the actual full case notes of what's going on with this individual. So you're giving advice to someone without knowing the full story. The therapist is absolutely responsible for that. That's why a therapist has to get all of that intake information. That's why they ask you all those questions. And that's why a lot of people are like, I don't want to switch therapists. I already have spent so much time building a relationship with this therapist, because it does take time. That therapist has to build an understanding of your particular life before they start to help and give you advice. It'd be the same thing as, like, a doctor saying, oh, you got stomach pain? Well, we probably need to cut your appendix out, not realizing that it's actually a kidney stone. It's the doctor's responsibility to diagnose effectively. Jessa is not doing that here because it's impossible to do that here. She doesn't even really know these people's actual names. So there's an abuse of power here. And that's the same reason why you can't have a sexual relationship with a client, because there's no way in a therapeutic relationship that roles can be equal. In order for it to be an equal romantic and sexual relationship, these two have to meet on equal footing. If you meet someone who's a therapist, it's already on equal footing. You're going to trust that therapist's advice more than you probably would even trust your own advice or trust the advice of other people. So if that therapist said, hey, we should go out for a drink, it's going to be a lot harder to say no to that therapist than it would be to say, some creepy guy down the corner, right? Or creepy girl down the corner. Hey, let's go have a drink. No, thanks. Don't want to. And the reason that I think that it's not just advice and it is therapy is because it's being prescriptive. They are practicing therapeutic techniques. And even in one clip, she says, we practiced some Gestalt techniques last time on live. We practiced some Gestalt techniques. You can't tell people how to do Gestalt techniques to help with their anxiety unless they're your client. You can do it in a group, yes, but even in group therapy, each person has to sign a consent for group therapy, right? It's different. You can talk about things, but you can't coach someone through an exercise without calling it therapy, because it is therapy. And that's dangerous to do, because there can be a lot of negative reactions to some of these therapeutic techniques if you're not making sure that it's the right therapeutic technique for them at that time. Now, finally, here's the reason why I don't think Jessa's going to stop. It's gaining her a lot of attention. And we know not only does attention kind of fuel people's behavior, but there's a negative and opposite reaction too. The more that you tell a child to stop, not that Jessa's a child, but I'm just giving an example. The more that you tell a child to stop, what do they usually do? They keep going. The more that you tell somebody not to do something, what do? They keep going. And so it's almost as though the amount of backlash, and I can even see it in the way that she responds to the criticism that she gets from others. She responds very kind of aggressively and just like, ugh, they're idiots. Or, well, she doesn't say that, but she's like, ugh, they don't understand, or they're not making any sense. I'm not doing that. And so instead of being open to hearing some of the criticism and thinking, okay, well, let me see this with an open eye, she's very closed down. And that can happen with conflict. Sometimes when conflict gets very intense, which with Jessa, it's very intense right now. With that conflict, people close down and they tunnel in to their ways. And you can see that happening with Jessa. So I don't think she's going to stop anytime soon. And I'm very curious to continue to watch it, because I don't think it's going to last for long. Somebody's going to end up making a report because it's not too difficult to find somebody's license online. It's all public records, and as long as you can type in their name, you can find their license. So I hope that helps, and I hope it helps you find a good therapist for you. I'll see you next time. Bye. You got anything to say, Ollie? What is that? What did you want me to tell them? He says, please subscribe.